So in a previous video, I introduced you to two particular roles that are important. I introduced you to the role of the public intellectual, which is an opinion and agenda-driven role, and I introduced you to the role of the scholar, which is a truth-oriented role. It's not that public intellectuals are bad, and it's not that having an opinion is bad. These are just simply two different roles that a person can play, two different modes of engaging with knowledge. Public intellectuals or opinion makers, when we are engaging in opinion-oriented discussion or debate, we have something we believe to be true and we're trying to defend it. The scholar, on the other hand, starts out not assuming that they know what is true. And they're trying to ensure through a specific methodology that the findings they arrive at through their research reflect the truth, that they're actually communicating to the best of their ability something that is true. There's a third role that I want to introduce you to here, and that is the activist scholar. So, public intellectuals, they are opinion driven, or they are opinion makers. They are agenda driven, and they are ideology driven. Scholars, on the other hand, engage in truth oriented inquiry. Scholars are not trying to win a debate. They are trying to understand the world as it truly is. But as you begin performing the role of the scholar, particularly as you begin engaging in research, but you're not a scholar yourself yet, something you're going to have to be careful of is the activist scholar. Now, the activist scholar appears to engage in scholarship in very much the same way as a scholar does, but the activist scholar is not truth-oriented. In fact, the activist scholar is a lot more like the public intellectual in that when they do their research, they are agenda-driven and ideology-driven. They aren't looking for the truth. They're looking to forward whatever their particular agenda is or reinforce whatever their particular ideology is. Now, what's interesting about this is that they accuse truth-oriented scholars of engaging in the exact same sort of behaviors that they engage in. Part of the way that they excuse their agenda-driven scholarship is by assuming that everybody is engaged in agenda-driven scholarship. But this simply isn't true. There are people out there, there are scholars, philosophers who want to understand the truth. So you have to be careful when you're reading scholarly texts to differentiate between those who are looking for the truth and those who have an agenda that they want to forward. And you will see this agenda-driven scholarship in every area of the academy. I like to refer to these as pseudo-scholars. This is not real scholarship. The activist scholar and the scholar, what they do may look a lot alike. They look like they're doing a lot of the same stuff. They're doing a lot of research. They use a lot of the same language. Well, they don't always use a lot of the same language. I mean, the truth is a lot of activist scholarship disciplines create their own vocabulary, their own jargon. I mean, this language is designed to establish and reinforce the agenda or the ideology. But again, one of the things that makes it difficult to differentiate between these two things is that the activist scholar and the scholar look like they're doing the same thing. The big difference is that the activist scholar begins with their conclusions. They already know what they're going to find. It's just a matter of manipulating the facts and imposing their ideologically heavy language on whatever situation it is they're analyzing in order to reinforce the agenda or further the agenda, reinforce the ideology. One clear way to tell the difference between ideologically driven activist scholarship and truth-oriented scholarship is that there's a decided bias there, and it is not a bias towards truth or towards fact. It's a bias toward a particular ideology. So the activist scholar is a biased scholar. You don't want your scholarship to be that. You want your scholarship to be truth-oriented. Now, here's one of the problems that we see with the activist scholars. One of the things that you'll see coming out of activist scholarship is this idea that there are many truths, that truth itself is biased. Neither one of these is true, right? What we're seeing here is a play on words. When an activist scholar or a public intellectual, when we hear that phrase, my truth or your truth, or the idea that there are many truths, or that somebody's truth is a biased truth, what we're actually seeing is a play on words. That's not what truth means. Truth is a noun, and it means the quality or state of being true. True is an adjective that means conforming to fact or reality. So the reality is the truth, when we use that, means that which conforms to fact or reality. That's what the truth is. How can there be many truths? What's actually being done here is what they refer to as many truths or my truth or your truth. What they're actually meaning is my experience or my interpretation of experience. But my experience or my interpretation of experience, those phrases are not nearly as powerful as saying my truth. So this is a rhetorical trick. What they're doing is they're using an emotionally charged word, truth, to make their claims stronger than they would be otherwise. To just say, well, in my experience, blah, blah, blah. You weaken anything you say by saying that. When you say, well, my interpretation of what I was seeing is blah, 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 you weaken anything you say when you say that, because my interpretation is not nearly as emotionally charged, not as nearly as powerful as saying my truth. So this is a rhetorical trick that gets played, and we call this Humpty Dumptying. Humpty Dumptying is a term that comes from it means arbitrarily or strategically redefining a word in order to win an argument, and it comes from the character of Humpty Dumpty in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. There's this great scene where she comes across Humpty Dumpty for the first time, and he uses the word glory in a way that she doesn't understand. And she says, I don't think that's how you use the word glory. And she says, what do you mean by the word glory? And he says, well, a nice knockdown argument. Now Alice says, I don't think that's what the word glory means. And Humpty Dumpty says, when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. The question is, said Alice, whether you can make words mean so many different things. The question is, said Humpty Dumpty, which is to be master. That's all. And this is really interesting because this is the key. People who misuse words, who arbitrarily redefine a word in the middle of an argument, or who arbitrarily redefine a word in order to use its emotional quality to win the argument, because they know that presenting things according to reality would cause them to either lose the argument or at least make their ideas more apparently arbitrary and subjective. This is a form of what we call equivocation. And equivocation is a fallacy. It is playing on multiple definitions of a word at the same time. Humpty Dumpty takes that to kind of a new degree, because whereas when you're equivocating, you're playing on multiple multiple meanings of a word that are already known. With Humpty Dumptying, You're not even doing that. You're not even jumping between known meanings of the word. You're using the word purely for its uh, um, emotionally charged uh, power, and you are arbitrarily redefining that word in order to win an argument or make your ideas seem more acceptable than they truly are or they truly would be. So this idea that there are many truths, that truth equals bias, the reality is truth is exactly the opposite of bias. Truth does not equal bias. And there are not many truths. These are examples of Humpty Dumptying. By arbitrarily redefining the word truth, activist scholars hide their agenda-driven inquiry. They hide their ideology-driven inquiry, and they become Humpty Dumpty. They want to master whatever the discipline is without needing to master the discipline. If they can just master language, that's all they need to do in order to win the argument. And you have to be very careful because these kinds of ideas, which have been at work in the academy for decades now, this Humpty Dumptying that has been at work in the academy for decades now is trickling down into our culture. And you've probably experienced this. You've probably experienced losing an argument or not knowing what to say because somebody uses a word that's so powerful and you have no comeback to it. Just ask yourself, are they using that word correctly? There's a great thing about the story of Humpty Dumpty. Because if we go back to the nursery rhyme, he has a great fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men can't put him back together again. This is huge, because the idea here, if we apply what Lewis Carroll is saying in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland to this concept of Humpty Dumptying, Humpty Dumptying is an egg-like argument. It may be beautiful and it may feel good to engage in it, but it is fragile. These arguments will break if they're pressed at all. So just press them a little bit, not to win the argument, not for that reason. You don't want to destroy Humpty Dumpty just to be cruel. Your goal is truth-oriented inquiry. You want to avoid Humpty Dumpty and you want to expose it when you see it, because in the role of scholar, your goal is to problematize things until you get to the truth. And if you're not 100% sure what that truth is, then don't say that you know it. Just allow that truth to be tentative or preliminary. That way, as you perform the scholarly role, you don't accidentally move into the role of activist scholar, which I will admit can be it can feel really good to be an activist scholar because you feel like you're doing something good in the world. But no man can serve two masters, right? If you're going to be an activist, your scholarship is going to suffer. If you're going to be a scholar, in the moment that you're performing the role of the scholar, activism is going to have to be put to the side unless that activism is the pursuit of truth. You want to avoid being an activist scholar because the problem is that, like I said, if you're Humpty Dumptying, that's a fragile position to be in. Truth is not. Truth is a bedrock. Everything can rest on the sure foundation of truth. Can't build a house with an egg. So, your goal, as you are introduced into research writing and academic scholarship, you want to perform the role of the truth truth-oriented scholar. Truth-oriented inquiry should be your goal. Not a public intellectual, not an activist scholar. You don't want to pursue an opinion. You don't want to start with opinion. You want to try and discover the truth. I hope you found this helpful. In subsequent essays or in subsequent videos, I will talk a little bit more about how to differentiate between a truth-oriented inquiry and an agenda-driven inquiry. Talk to you later. Bye.